This is Conversation Balloons, a podcast of interviews with experts and friends about all things generational. I'm your host, Leah Farish. Welcome back to Conversation Balloons, where we're going to be talking to Emma Lembke. She's a 21-year-old digital youth advocate at Washington University currently, and she is the founder of Log Off, which empowers Gen Z in their relationship with social media and how we can protect kids and give them a voice on consumer tech issues. She also founded Technically Politics to perform these functions also and reach these goals. She's also a core team member for the Design It For Us coalition. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you for having me back.
You have done so much in relation to influencing your peers in Gen Z on the dangers of overuse of social media. I really like your nuanced approach that says that it's not all bad. We're not talking about a cold turkey rejection of all social media. You remind me a little bit in this approach of Laura Tierney at the Social Institute. Are you familiar with her work?
I am.
Yeah, we've had her on, and she's wonderful. But you do engage in activism. You have addressed a Senate committee on a U.S. Senate committee on the uses of social media by kids and the dangers therein. And you're engaged in policy issues as well, and in the issues of how we design these apps, third-party apps like Bark and things like that, Presence that you mentioned earlier, to help manage our time online. And what are some of the important legislative and policy initiatives that you're currently interested in?
I'm interested in a lot. I think that there are multiple streams and ways in which young people and activists writ large can engage. You can engage in the judicial manner and through lawsuits. You can engage through legislative action, and you can engage, through a lot of the grassroots kind of community organizing that we've been working on at Design It For Us and at Log Off. But legislatively, I think that we've really been looking at the states and passing kids codes and looking at, like age appropriate design codes and how that they move across the states and how that they are being mimicked after what was passed in the UK. And I think we're looking at, some really important bills to protect kids online by establishing duty of care. Specifically, we're looking at, the Kids Online Safety Act that's being looked at right now at a federal level.
Well, I think that's very commendable that you would take the legislative bull by the horns, that you have hope for politics. I wonder if you have seen any partisan differences in response to what you're doing. I know you're nonpartisan in your approach, but I read an interesting study that said 67% of parents who consider themselves conservative strongly agree with restrictions on screen time for kids ages 3 to 19, whereas only 23% of parents who consider themselves politically moderate, liberal, or very liberal agree on restricting screen time. Are you aware of that, and has that impacted the reception of your suggestions?
I'm aware of it, but what I have found has been immense bipartisan support. I really do believe that it's largely due to the fact that, many parents, no matter if they would, monitor their kids' screen time usage, no matter if they would, take that next step, they want to see that tech companies are at least proactively designing social media platforms to be more conducive for the young mind and for young people. So while, I think that study limits it limits the field to one specific intervention, whether or not you would intervene in your kid's screen time. It doesn't zoom out to just ask a larger question on, do you want to see tech companies being held responsible? And I think if you were to ask that, you get a much more resoundingly bipartisan support on both sides for legislation that does that. I think the way in which you go about creating responsibility for tech companies differs, and that's when you can begin to see differences across party lines. But on things like the Kids Online Safety Act, I've seen just resounding bipartisan support.
Good. Yeah, it shouldn't be a political issue.
No,
um,
not at all. And especially so many senators and members of the House, they've got kids. They want to see those kids protected, and I think that's one entry point that's really worked for a lot of us, is just saying, like, what's the online world that you want your kid to experience? We want it to be safe. We don't want to have another generation of guinea pigs, which is exactly what Gen Z was.
oh, wow. That's powerful. I was reading that um, Pew Research found in 2022 that 54% of teens said it would be very hard or somewhat hard to give up social media. 25% of boys said it would be very easy. Only 15% of girls said it would be
Mhm.
very easy to give it up. Almost half say they're online almost constantly. Um, Black and Hispanic teens, about 20%, they're about 20% more likely to report being online almost constantly. There's only a 10% difference, a greater participation by urban kids over rural or suburban. But these numbers tell me that kids don't have it within them to resist the blandishments of these, social media giants who are constantly observing them and marketing
Mhm.
to them. So it does seem like the time has come for some
Mhm.
kind of legal intervention. You mentioned responsibility, that they should take responsibility. Does that mean this, you know, what they call 230 liability, or litigation,
Mhm.
judgments against them? What do you mean when you say take responsibility? And tell our audience what 230 liability is.
Yeah, so Section 230 it's a beast in and of itself. Section 230 shields companies um, from basically it basically shields company from being held responsible for content that is put on their site by third parties. It's basically understood that it's kind of like a community board. Like, why would you hold the board owner responsible for what's pinned on the board? Obviously, we are not no longer in community board days. We are in a different age of social media and the online experience. I think that Section 230 should be revisited. I personally do believe that. But I also think that that's a very, very long and arduous journey that will take an incredibly long time and many swaths of advocates to help push. I think responsibility for me is genuinely just placing and re-establishing the onus to be on tech companies to design technology with young people in mind. That to me is responsibility. It's saying, we understand that young people are on our platforms, we understand that they are being harmed, and we are now taking that understanding and converting it into action. We are going to design proactively, our platforms with that understanding. That to me would be responsibility, but that's not currently what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's called safety by design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really a tough sell as an attorney, I think, to establish causation in an
Mhm.
individual lawsuit, to establish that one student, was harmed by, or a child was harmed by a social media company. The,
Mhm.
the, the chain of causation is tricky. I do think that the exposure of these companies is a little more clear when they have enabled a drug dealer to contact a
Mhm.
child, and we're seeing a lot of children actually being killed by the
Yep.
fact that a drug dealer can find them by geolocation on their phone and
Mhm.
deliver a harmful substance to them with the parents out not even knowing it. We
Mhm.
do have kids dying from this, and I know that Scrolling to Death, I don't know if you know that organization, they're
Mhm.
lobbying right now for Sammy's Law, which I don't know if you want to talk about it, but it does encourage this limitation on third parties getting access to kids, especially through Snapchat. Snapchat
Mhm.
seems to have been very opaque and resistant to complaints that they are facilitating these contacts and children are dying or being hurt as a result.
Mhm.
Um, what are some other design features? I think I heard you mention, maybe in your testimony to the Senate, that autoplay was a
Yeah.
design problem. Tell about that.
I think autoplay, the endless scroll, push notifications, things like that, that trap the user on platform, maximize their attention, and limit the amount of friction between them and the technology. And what I mean by that is, I mean that there is no stopping queue. You're not being asked, do you want to spend more time on this platform? You instead are being fed content. You're being recommended something. You are being led in a direction the company wants you to go in because they think that that will maximize your engagement and attention. Those can be really dangerous. That's when you get harmful recommended content pushed towards young women. That's when you get, a random new follower that, then messages you. Oh, one other thing is, direct DMs. One thing that should not occur is direct DMs from unwanted messengers, specifically to young people. So things like that, those type of features really need to be fact checked, and they need to be projected up against the needs of young people to better understand if they are worthwhile or if they should be corrected for the young user.
What do you think about laws or at least state level regulations on use of phones in the classroom
Hmm.
or access to them?
I think it's difficult. I think that my sister was a substitute teacher, um, when she was finishing out her time at Brown, and she said, there was a school that she was with that implemented the Yonder pouches where you put your phone in the pouch, it magnetically seals, and then you're on your way. And she said kids were smashing the bags open. They were getting magnets. They were opening it up themselves. They were bringing dummy decoy phones. So I think that this is not as black and white as many believe it to be.
Mhm.
And I think that it's a good step to investigate and to critically be thinking about, okay, what is the role of the phone in a school and learning environment? I did a whole research paper on and literature review on how even like you said, the mere presence of phones can be unconducive for cognitive functioning and learning and just communication in general. But I think that we need to look at it in a very holistic manner. So if you're going to look at banning phones, how else are you going to look at bringing in screen time literacy? How else are you going to educate young people and not just take away their phones? Because young people are scrappy and they will find ways around it. So what you want to do is you want to plant the seed to allow a young person to understand how can they regain control and be an active agent of change in terms of their own online experience for the better. How can they navigate the online world in a safer way so that when they do decide to enter, when they are outside of the classroom, they can do so in a healthy, productive manner rather than just being, told that their phones are going to be taken away from them. I think bans are blunt instruments for change, and oftentimes you need to sharpen the razor a little bit by looking at greater nuance.
That's a good way to put it. Um, I I found that students when I was teaching in college would be, say they're taking notes on their laptop, and by the nature of the laptop, I can't see what's back there. But I moved around a lot through the room. I did not
Mhm.
just stand at the front because amazingly there were in one school I walked behind a male student and he was looking at porn.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
here I was trying to teach about Elizabethan literature or whatever, and I can't compete with that. No way.
Mhm.
And even though he knew I was openly walking behind him, he didn't disengage from it. So that's very disturbing. But yeah,
Mhm.
we teachers can't compete with some of what's on there,
Mhm.
and um, self discipline is hard for any student, and
Mhm.
asking them to just refrain and have access to it in the room,
Yeah.
I think that's a lot. That's a lot. I think we're
Mhm.
going to have some kind of design features, maybe something that, um, I don't know, some kind of location thing. Whereas if they're
Mhm.
in this school building or in this classroom, it doesn't connect or something. I don't know
Yeah,
enough about tech.
you could look there are so many cool interventions that could be had. You could have like a server to where if you get on a certain server, it slows down your ability to get on the platform. So imagine if you're a young person and you're trying to scroll on Instagram and it just won't load. Boom. You could go about it in many different ways. And I think that that's the role of software developers in the 21st, in our 21st century. And as we continue moving forth into the digital age and the age of AI, we need smart people who can help develop out these interventions. We don't just need smart people to be sucked into big tech where they will design even more addictive features.
Hmm. Yeah, years ago, I don't want to even say how many years ago, but this will date me. But our school district was promoting getting computers in every classroom, and they
Hmm.
were imagining desktops at the time, and it was a huge expense, and it was something that, of course, every district wanted. We all
Hmm.
wanted our students to be able to be online. That just sounded like the gateway to the future, and it was. Um, but I was being interviewed on a radio show about it because I didn't feel like the districts were providing any safeguards for
Hmm.
what students would be exposed to online. I don't know that we had the technical ability back then to, filter, to buffer, whatever that we do now. The person that I was kind of debating with on the radio show said, "Well, what possible harm? What are you so afraid of, Leah? What could an a website use our kids' data or attention for?" And I said, "Marketing." And it just popped out of my mouth. It was like the first time I ever heard anyone say,
Hmm.
watch out for the financial incentive that these companies have for getting your kids engaged and getting their information. And
Hmm.
I was pretty sure that our districts didn't have the know how to prevent at least, hacking into them or some kind of
Hmm.
observation of our kids' activity online. And it reminds me of there's a French theologian from the 20th century who I think um, he wrote a book called Technique and one called which he meant technology and use of it and the meaning of the city. And he said when a man enters into the city, which he meant mostly the technology of the city,
Hmm.
he becomes merchandise.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a very prescient statement for someone who really wasn't exposed to any of what we have now. But we have become merchandise, and
Hmm.
um, our dollars and our eyes are ruthlessly sought after, and it's a challenge. What is the biggest resistance that you have come up against in your activism?
The millions, I'd say billions of dollars worth of lobbying force that is provided via big tech. You would be shocked with how fervent and omnipresent that force is. if a kids code gets passed, instantly sued by Net Choice or by another, lobbying firm that's gonna an advocacy firm that's gonna back these big tech companies. So it's just the sheer number and force that you're up against. But I will say, more and more organizations are beginning to stand up and push back. So there are more advocacy groups that are, pushing for change. There's Fight for Our Future, Accountable Tech, a ton of parents groups. So you're beginning to see key stakeholders stand up and say we are no longer going to allow this lobbying arm, these big tech companies, and all of its, all of their other brethren who are trying to extrapolate your attention at the cost of your well-being to do so without a fight. So I believe you're beginning to see a lot of stakeholders stand up and demand for change, and that's countering the large amount of individuals who are pushing for the interests of these companies.
Yeah, I think we can make a good analogy to the food industry where
Yeah.
we, you know, say, look, there's no portion control right now, and
Mm-hmm.
kids are gorging on this. We have a mental obesity problem, or analogizing to smoking and the regulations that we've put on that and said adults can smoke. We're going to put warnings on, but they can make their own choice. But
Mm-hmm.
we're going to, require vendors to ascertain the age of these kids and
Mm-hmm.
refuse it. This product is dangerous and addictive to kids, and
Mm-hmm.
we're just not going to make that part of our commerce. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the teeth with smoking, again, going back to litigation, came from mass litigation, and that there may be you know required some mass tort litigation against the media companies.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciated what you said about the fact that many of the legislators have kids, and their concern um, emerges when they think about their own kids. I uh, I think I said this elsewhere on a podcast, but I had a cousin, Hal Riney, who was in advertising. He won many Clio awards. He had the It's
Mm-hmm.
Morning Again in America campaign for Ronald Reagan, and was a real leader in advertising, TV advertising especially. And we got to visit him in San Francisco, and my family was at his house, and we were going to go out to lunch and leave our kids all together and with the nanny and let them play. And I said, they can watch a movie or something if that's helpful. And Hal said, my kids don't watch TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, wow. After we got out, I said, how is it? You're in the industry. How is it that you don't you want to at least watch the competition? And I can't imagine you don't watch TV. And he said, that's not where the ideas come from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of, I know family members who are in tech and are designing software and doing coding and things, and they're extremely conservative about what their children are exposed to online, and they know the harms better than anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
if you appeal to the conscience of these people and the future of our nation, I think you'll continue to do very well, Emma.
Well,
Um,
I hope that, like you said, that the ideas come elsewhere, the connection comes elsewhere. So I'm hoping that, you know, we all begin to see that this is a fight for not just, our kids' future, but it's everyone's future. It's an understanding of what we're going to prioritize moving forward as a nation and as a world. So really hopeful and excited to continue to be in that fight.
well, as you enter your senior year there in college, I know you'll be very, very busy, but I wish you the best in your advocacy and all your endeavors. And thank you much for coming on.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Subscribe and review Conversation Balloons on your favorite podcast platform. Find me at leahfarish.com and on Instagram at LeahFarish.